Hi there, my name is Martin Stone from Switch On Health. A question that we get asked quite a lot when people are thinking about studying natural health is iridology included in our courses? The answer is yes, it is, at an introductory level. At Switch On Health, we teach you the basics, which is definitely enough for you to be able to get started, start using it in your practice with your clients, and to be able to get some good results. However, iridology is a big topic, and the only reason that we at Switch On Health only teach it at an introductory level is because it is just too big to squeeze into one of our advanced diploma programs when there's enough in there already as it is. What we always say to people is, iridology is such an immense topic that, it really is a course by itself. And if you want to learn more, if you want to get really good at it, you're really much better off studying it as a separate course. This could be professional development or as an add-on after you've studied with Switch On Health or concurrently. They're both good options. But yeah, if you really want to get good at iridology, it really deserves its own kind of mini qualification. So this is what we always say to people. And when people come back and they say, where would I go to find such a course? We always say the same thing. There's only one name that we ever mention, and that name is Toni Miller. I'm very happy to be joined by Toni tonight, who is going to take us through a presentation where she'll talk a bit about iridology so we can learn more about this fascinating topic. And of course, she'll also explain to you a bit about what she offers. Over to you, Toni.
Thank you so much. That's a very lovely introduction, Martin. So my name is Toni Miller, and tonight I want to introduce you to integrated iridology at a very starting level. So my career began in 1981. I was a budding mother of 5 and wanted to know how I could look after my children. And so this was one of the courses that were, or at an introductory level, that I did when I was studying naturopathy. But I wrote and taught my first class in iridology in 1984. And that class, by the way, was the very first one given diploma status by the Australian Traditional Medicine Society. So I continue to teach. I have been a researcher all these years. I've written 2 very popular textbooks, the Integrated Iridology textbook, and my recent one is The Mind Matters, which is the emotional elements of integrated iridology. I've been honoured to have been voted simultaneously the International Iridology Practitioners Association Iridologist of the Year and Iridology Instructor of the Year in 2014. I think I'm the only person who received both of those awards in the same year. And I was given an Iridology Fellowship in 2018 and the first recipient of the Presidential Award in 2019. So I'm not trying to brag, but I'm trying to show you that I have had a little bit of experience. I've been around the block a few times with this subject, which I absolutely love, iridology. Now, first of all, I want to talk to you about how amazing our eyes really are. If you think about it, the eye is the most complex external structure of human anatomy, and it is the only internal organ that is visible externally. Providing a person opens their eyelids, you can see this wonderful structure. And if you've been studying iridology at all, you will have already seen some reasons why people refer to eyes as the windows of the soul. The first thing you should know is that every eye is unique, completely unique. In fact, your right eye will be different from your left eye. So you can see that they are a pair in most instances, but if you look carefully, you can see that there are marks, for example, in this right eye that are not in this left eye in the same position. There are pigments here, but none here. And the same with this lower pair of eyes. And even in identical twins, eyes are unique. So you can see in the top section, these eyes are not really manifesting the pigment layer that the eyes in the lower section are. And just a little note, these twins, when they were born, were so alike that the mother left the hospital bands on one of the baby's legs so that she could tell which one was who. So in spite of how alike they are from the physical perspective, their eyes are different. And again, the right eye is different from the left in each case. Now, what a lot of people don't know is that iridology is progressive. And there are colleges that still teach the foundational work that was brought about by Bernard Jensen or Dorothy Hall, who were wonderful pioneers. I mean, they did give us the foundation without which we would not have the iridology that we know today. But I want to ask you as an audience, whether this is your first venture or a refresher, I'm hoping that this presentation will inspire you to go further, because there is so much more that we know now than we used to know. And so we'll start with some basics. So I think a good illustration is the telephone. It's been around for over 100 years now, but more has been found in the last, say, 10, 15 years than in the previous 100. And why is that? Because it's easier to improve a prototype than it is to come up with the original. So I'm sure you'll all agree with that. And of course, this is true with iridology as well. More has been done in the last 20 years than in the previous 100. So let's look at some major iris landmarks. And the first one we want to look at is the collarette, which is, you can see in the second image from the left. It's clearly outlined in white here. Most eyes have a collarette that's visible. Not all eyes will display this very clearly, but it is the major iris landmark. And why is that? Because it represents the autonomic nervary, or the sympathy or the symphony that occurs between parasympathetic and sympathetic responses. Bernard Jensen said about this feature in the eye, it is the hub upon which the organs rely that the wheel of life may continue. So what it does is it separates the intestines and stomach from all the other organs and tissues and glands and structures in the eye. And its correct position should be between 1/4 and 1/3 the distance from the pupil border to the outer iris rim, with a smooth, slightly oval shape. So we've got a good example here. So here we see it, it's approximately 1/4 to 1/3 of this distance from the pupil border to the limbus. And when it is balanced, as this one is, it's an indication of inherently good digestion, assimilation, and elimination. Can this person get digestive problems? Yes, they can, because everything that we have, everything we see in our eyes, whether we develop the best case or the worst case scenario, does depend on what we eat, what we drink, what we think, and how we live, and who we love. So there is a chart that I've developed, and I've just recently updated that chart, but this shows how the collarette location, shape, and structural quality indicate intestinal efficiency and the influence of the autonomic nervous system on the adjacent iris tissue. So if you see a mark, for instance, we've got a mark just here, which would be medial, it'll be in this area. It's going to indicate poor function between the sympathetic and parasympathetic influence on that particular area. So let's look at placement. If the autonomic nerve, or if the collarette is constricted, this suggested reduced digestive and absorbent capabilities. But more importantly, this is dependent on size of the meals. So this is about the size of the gastric area. How much can I efficiently digest and absorb? These people are very much suited to small, frequent meals of high quality ingredients because their pathway to disease is habitual dietary overindulgence. And this is something you should know if you've got children. This is a major thing that would influence you in a good way to make sure that you don't think that all your kids are the same, because they actually do have various differences. And it can also indicate that these people tend to be more introverted. They're quite private people. Again, if this is your child, they may not tell you everything that's going on. They might not tell you everything that they're feeling. So it's a major iris landmark in many ways. The converse, which is an atonic collarette, you can see that the collarette is way further out than a quarter to a third. It's more than half the way out the distance here. This shows an intestinal tract with poor tone and decreased peristalsis. So common features for these include abdominal distension, bloating, and flatulence. And again, this depends to a large degree on their diet, but their bowel habits have a natural tendency to be sluggish. And as far as their personality is concerned, these are much more outgoing, even extroverted types. So that's two simple lessons that I've given you, and try that on your friends. Like, just have a look at placement of the collarette and see if they have a small collarette. Note whether you can see that they are a little bit more on the timid side, or if they have a large collarette, you can expect an extroverted nature. Now, another important feature that you should examine with every person is their pupil, which should be black, round, and in a slightly medial position. So in fact, the placement of the pupil can identify an eye where you can't see the actual outer tissue of the eye, so you can't see whether it's a right eye or a left eye. And the rule of thumb is that when you're looking at an eye, if the pupil is shifted to your right, so in this case, the pupil is shifted to the right, less space here than here, this is a right iris. And conversely, if it's shifted to the left, it will be a left iris. So here's a little test for you. If we look at this eye, we have less space here than here. So it is shifted to the right. Is this a right or a left iris? Did you say it was right? Well, then you got it right. And if we look at this one, again, is this a left or a right iris? Have a look. Compare the distance. Again, did you pick that it was a right iris? Congratulations. You just achieved a tick. That's great. All right. So moving on. The pupil size, in fact, affects the iris structure. And this feature should be noted in all consultations. So small pupils tend to tighten the iris structure. You can see here that the fibers are very compact. They look quite dense. And we refer to small pupils as being myotic, or this is a condition called miosis. And this can indicate parasympathetic dominance, particularly if the eyes are, or if the pupils are constantly very small. So persistent small pupils indicate parasympathetic dominance. And the opposite is true when we have large pupils. These are called mydriatic. The condition is mydriasis. And this is associated with sympathetic dominance. And so you probably notice that most children tend to be mydriatic. Their pupils are more open. And I've mentioned that pupil size dramatically, in some cases, impacts the iris structure. So this is what we would call ideal as far as the pupil size is concerned. But in severe mydriasis, this structure here is almost unrecognizable from this one. But if you look at where the lacuna are, you can see that it is indeed the same iris. Notice that the pigmentation is in the same location, and so on. It can also impact our perspective of color. So you notice that in mydriasis, the pigments do look slightly darker, even a different shade of brown. And when you haven't become aware that you should look and consider pupil size, you can sometimes think that iris color might have changed. So if you saw this one first and then you see this one second, this color looks lighter all round than the color in this one. So it is a very important feature to always check the size of pupils when you're looking at people. And if you're doing iris comparative analysis, part of that analysis should be, are the pupils the same size? Because you can get a different outcome if they're not. And the shape of pupils is significant. So in this case, we have an ellipsoid pupil. You can see it's slightly ellipsed. And this can relate to chemoelectric pressure change in the fluid economy, particularly of the cerebral sector. Whereas if we note flattening areas in the pupil, these are directly related to spinal issues. And there is, on the integrated iridology chart, you'll notice that there is a segment that borders the pupil itself that shows you which parts of the spine would be impacted based on the position of the flattening. And a big topic in iridology, of course, is pigmentation. Now, there are two types of pigmentation. We have constitutional pigment and we also have secondary pigment. So let's first of all look at some constitutional pigment, which includes heterochromia. So hetero literally means extra and chromia means color. So we have a large central heterochromia in this iris. You notice that it's a different color than this area. And this is constitutional. So it's something that you're born with, and it's also something that remains with you for the rest of your life. And even if it was a sectoral heterochromia, so just part of the eye was covered by a large pigment, this too is constitutional. And you'll usually find in cases like this that there is some familiar history involving the areas that are covered with pigment. Now, before we look at secondary pigments, we need to understand that less than 5% of children under 5 have secondary pigments, but more than 60% of adults over 50 have them, which suggests that they are accumulative. And that is exactly right. They're also, in various textbooks, they're referred to as iris freckles, miasma, drug spots, or in some cases, they're referred to as being toxic. But here's an example of development of pigment over a period of some years. So this is at age 4, and this is in the gallbladder area, no pigment. And at age 13, we have the expression of some pigment in this region. By 15, it has become darker. And at the age of 17, it's not only darker, it's also larger. And this is very interesting because in classical iridology, or Bernard Jensen's iridology, he referred to this type of pigment as toxicity, which could be removed with detoxing programs. And sad to say, I absolutely love and adore Dr. Jensen, and he was my mentor for 17 years. But, you know, you don't know what you don't know, and he did not know that this was not true. And there have been many instances where people have, unfortunately, even doctored books to prove this point. But I originally believed this teaching myself, but in the 90s, I was challenged to prove it, and I found that I couldn't prove it. And of course, I've had another 25 or so years since then. Pigments accumulate. Just like, look at your own hands, or if you're not particularly old, think of somebody that you know that is older, maybe over 60 or 70, and they'll get what they call age spots on their arms and their hands. We develop odd pigments as we age, and that's true in our iris as well. Here's an example where this person at the age of 45 just had a couple of pigments, but by the time they were 60, they had multiple pigments in their eyes. And what research has shown that these can be multidimensional. There's all sorts of reasons and things that are attached to the development of pigments. The placement of pigments, the number of pigments is all significant, and it can be linked to possibilities including genetics. It can be due to physical exposure or injury. It can even be related to emotional and transgenerational influences. So we base our findings on colour and number, but I teach a whole unit just on pigmentation because there is so much information that can be gleaned from pigment, placement, numbers, and colour, including pathology. So that's very interesting. And these are permanent once present. Now, the sclera is the white of the eye, and it is a special feature in iridology. The iris itself is very, very stable for your whole life, but the sclera does change. I mean, if you poke your finger in your eye, it'll go red. And, you know, the washout period can be as little as half an hour. It looks okay again. So we find that some markings will develop, fade, and even disappear during the correct course of treatment. But it makes a wonderful partner to iridology, and I use it with every assessment, because whereas the iris tells you where you came from, what kind of vehicle you're driving, what kind of driver you are, and the likely destination you'll have, the sclera is telling us what's going on right now. So it's a perfect partner to iridology. And the way we assess the sclera is by looking at the colours, the shapes of the vessels, and deposits that are actually on the white of the eye. So again, this is a very big subject in integrated iridology. So this is a healthy sclera. So she's 13. You can see that there are some minor vessels here. This is perfectly normal, nothing to see here. In fact, it is very rare to see a sclera completely devoid of any vessels. That's a very strong contrast here of an unhealthy adult. So we assess the sclera looking at the colour and shape of the vessels, which is related to vascular disturbance and mass medication in this particular case. So, you know, one of the side effects of some pharma medications is that it will disturb your equilibrium, and that will be expressed in the sclera. But the most important thing I want to really drive home to you today is the value of constitutional assessment. So the iris pattern itself is genetic, and the physical characteristics of the iris do not change with age. So you can read this faster than I could read it to you, but there is a thing called iris biometrics, which is based on the most mathematically unique biometric, the iris of the eye. Now, this is what you see if you go to some big airports like LA, for instance. You don't just provide your passport and your fingerprints, you also are asked to stand in front of a camera which looks at your eye print, because as I said in the first part of this presentation, no two eyes are alike. The minute details of iris texture are believed to be determined randomly during the fetal development of the eye. Now, for most of a human's lifespan, the appearance of the iris is relatively constant. So just keep that in mind. Most iris features are genetic, so primary color, structure, and some features on the surface of the eye can be put into a group where we refer to constitutional iridology. So the first part of my professional level course is called Essentials, which is the complete foundation to iridology as we understand it in 2022. And we look at about 60 individual signs. But constitutional iridology is based on the collection of signs and includes assessment of color, structure, and anterior surface features. So the Constitution indicates major issues for every individual, including, for example, once we see what is the color of eyes, this tells us our basic ideal diet. It also shows us deficiencies and genetic disposition. So boom, just like that, by seeing a person's color, you already know that information. The Constitution identifies the client's primary nurture points. So this is a very big feature, because if you looked at an iris, there might be at least 20 things you could talk about, but what is the primary nurture point? What is the thing I need to take most care of? The constitutional assessment will bring that out. So let's look at these aspects and how they fit a naturopathic overview. Each constitution is related specifically to a body system. So the color relates to one of three body systems. The structure relates to particular systems, and the diathesis likewise. Now, everybody has a color group, everyone, even albinos. So if you're an albino, you're going to be considered as a lymphatic, but everyone has a color group. And some people have a structure other than ideal, and some people have at least one, and sometimes more than one, diathesis. So these are accumulative. So if you've got a color and a structure and a diathesis, you can actually nail a person's complete, you can tell everything about them genetically, what diet they should have, who they're attracted to in relationships, how they do what they do as they interface with their world, and also their pathway to disease. So constitutional iridology is so valuable. So to begin with, there are just three primary iris colors. We have the blue group, known as lymphatic, the brown group, known as hematogenic, and everybody else is called mixed. And the color is the primary indicator to establish ideal dietary guidelines. So blue eyes or lymphatics, familially, they have moist, scaly skin rashes. They typically have had a history where there was an overactive immune system, so they could have had allergies and swollen glands. Skin conditions tend to be red, hot, and itchy, and inflammatory conditions accelerate with age. Sensitive mucous membranes lead to ear, nose and throat and respiratory problems. Catarrhal congestion can be triggered by a variety of irritants, including inhaled substances and foods, especially dairy, wheat and sugar. And all conditions improve with warmth. And these are flashcards that I've produced that help you in your clinic to explain to people how they need to do what they should do. And their lesson is love the skin you're in and accept your own limitations. So this is a 10-month-old lymphatic child. This is an adult, again, a lymphatic, because the primary color is blue. We have another one and another one with a little bit of yellow in it. So that brings the kidneys into play, and another. And there's a wellness card. You know, they need to minimize mucus forming foods, refined sugar and white flour, and especially dairy, and so on. Due to limitation of time, I'm probably not going to be able to read these pages to you as we go, but let's just move through this system and I'll take your questions at the end. So brown irises are called hematogenic. So you hear the word blood there. Hema means blood, and genetic or genic means that origin is usually to do with blood. So looking at these, they're familial issues. They may have no health complaints at all in early life because brown eyes are dominant, and you find a lot of the very strong ethnic cultures are people with brown eyes. But as they age, there is a tendency to have rapid circulation and a good strong pulse, but they tend towards circulatory issues, which might include hemorrhoids, varicose veins, spider veins. And the big one, raised cholesterol and triglycerides, which increase the risk of arterial plaque and hardening of the arteries. Faulty liver metabolism can produce pustular skin conditions and problems with the GIT, intestinal gas, and constipation. So another strong tendency is blood sugar issues, including diabetes, and their lesson is to take caution and think of the consequences before acting, because a lot of them tend to be extremely spontaneous. So in my program, I also teach the emotional elements of the constitution. So here's a little boy, 5 years old, and an adult. A lot of them have no other surface markings. This is the common one we see, indicating that they've got problems with lipids. If they do have lacuna, they still will be visible because the brown pigment does not fill up these spaces. It simply puts a sheer coating over the structure underneath. And yes, some of them do have pigmentation. And here's a hematogenic wellness card, which shows that the diet primarily needs to be high in fiber and low in animal fat, and also to limit sodium and trans fatty foods. You might be able to pause the video when it comes time to review this and read those cards at your own pace. So the other colours, or the mixtures of colours, are called mixed. So what do we know about them? They're usually found in people who have parents or grandparents with opposite colour eyes. So this is simply something of genetics. So if you have a brown puppy and a white puppy and they mate and have puppies, some of them will be brown, some of them will be white, but some of them will be spotty. And this is simply a genetic thing. It's not a bad thing. You know, this does not mean you've got a toxic overload and you've got to flush that out of your system and get rid of that. It simply is a statement that I had one parent or grandparent with blue eyes and another who had brown eyes. And when you ask that question, people will go home if they didn't know that already and check it out and come back and tell you, oh, yeah, that's actually right. And so the most common problem for the mixed group involves gastrointestinal issues, liver and gallbladder issues, and indigestion due to enzyme deficiency and blood sugar deregulation. So they may have IBS, and there is an increased likelihood of intestinal immunity deficiency. A sluggish liver can affect the uptake of fat-soluble vitamins But one of the things, if you're in doubt, are they mixed or not? Ask them if they have problems making up their mind, because their background is lymphatic and hematogenic, who are opposites in personality, opposites in thinking, opposites in the way they do things. And when you have a mixed color iris, you actually can, it's a blessing and a curse. You can see both sides of situations. And so you don't know, should I take this side or this side? So it can be, you know, it's nice that you can see both sides of a situation, but it's not always great that you have problems making up your mind. So in here is a little 4-month-old baby, and you can just see the beginning of the emergence of what will become a much darker color pigment over the next 2 years. It usually takes about 2, sometimes 3 years for that to completely solidify. And here we have another example and another. You can see the blue underneath and the brown pigment up here. And again, you know, a central heterochromia where you have strong contrast between the center and the outside part of the iris is the identifying mark, particularly of a classic mixed color iris. And then we have a special program where you follow to help support that person. So we want to look at structural variation because it identifies the strength of our connective tissue as well as individual personality traits. And there are 6 primary structural types. 3 relate to a faulty nervous system, that's these 3, and 3 relate to weak connective tissue, and they identify where that connective tissue would be. And what's really interesting is this is visible within months of birth. So these are little babies aged between, you can see already well easily to identify. And then lastly, we look at the diathesis, which can be inherited or acquired. And it is the most important aspect of constitutional assessment, because if you have a diathesis, not everybody does, but if you have one, it identifies the primary health issues in every individual. And these too can be identified in children. So a diathesis is something that we have either identified or we have earned through poor choices that will stay with us for the rest of our life. And this is what makes iridology so important, because someone might have come to you with, say, sinus problems, and when you look at their eyes, you note that they actually have signs indicating serious cardiovascular risk. Well, they're not likely to die from sinus, but cardiovascular risk kills 1 in every 3 people in the Western world. So, you know, it's so valuable. So some examples of diathesis include hyperacidic. So this is a constitution that can be either inherited from a parent or grandparent or acquired through eating high acid foods. This is an infant, a 5-year-old, who already has a hyperacidic diathesis. Now, this one here is hydrolymphatic. It's got lymphatic tophi around. You might have learned that as a lymphatic rosary, different terminology, but meaning the same thing. This is always inherited and it is permanent. You cannot get rid of it. And here is a 6-month-old, and you can see the tophi are starting to become quite clear in that little girl's eye. The pancreatic diathesis, this is something that I personally discovered about 15 years ago. I used to think that this was something that was always inherited, but it actually is also possibly earned. So this can be inherited or acquired, and this is a 4-year-old child already has a pancreatic diathesis. So how do you know if it's acquired or inherited? The only way you really know is if you've got photos from pretty much, you know, infancy and see as it progresses. because we do see increase in pigment as people age. And lastly, this is the lipemic diathesis, which this is the one that takes precedence over all others because it is an indicator of serious cardiovascular implications. So just to summarize, the primary color applies to everyone. Everyone has a color group. And this is where we pick our ideal diet. Some have structural variations, and that shows how we act and react as we interface with our world. And some people have one or more diatheses. And there are people who have elements of all three constitutional aspects, but remember that whether you've got all of them or two of them or one of them, if you've got maybe four of them, if you had two diatheses, for example, plus a structural type and a color, they're all accumulative. So the physical attributes and nuances will be relevant in each case, and so will the life lessons in each case. So in my opinion, constitutional assessment is the most revelatory aspect of physical iridology. Whether you develop dispositions to the best case or worst case scenario is influenced by the way you eat, drink, think, live, and love. Looking at the future, effective iridologists are up to date in their approach and practice in line with current standards. It is not good enough to not know what is current and in line with modern research. So I'm going to ask all of you, would you like to learn more? I think you're crazy if you don't want to. But it's not just about choosing the right course. It's also important to have the right teacher. Now, somebody else wrote this, but I've left it in there because I was in a hurry today to finalize this. But it's rare to find a teacher with decades of clinical and teaching experience. It is rare. I know that there are colleges throughout Australia that use my textbook as the reference, but they've got teachers who've never studied with me. And so you need to, experience in your teacher is so, so important because they are the only ones who can answer hard questions and give you the confidence that you're paying for. You want to end where you are confident to take this work and make it your own. So choose a course with substance supported by a teacher with the experience needed to answer your questions so that you graduate being confident as an iridologist. Now, I have a course called Advanced Physical Iridology, so you earn the acronym API, which includes the basics. You need to know what each of the basic signs means according to current research. Constitutional iridology, a huge subject on its own, but that's very much supported by understanding the position, the shape, and the quality of the collarette. Also the pupil and its border. Of course, you wouldn't want to have all this and not have the sclera. Then this course includes advanced level pigmentation, transversals, and lacuna morphology, which includes the identification of potential pathology. And so you get a beautiful certificate, and you'll also be eligible to apply for professional status membership with the International Iridology Practitioners Association. And I've got the address down at the bottom of this page where you can look this up. But this is a very big subject. I put my heart and soul into this with 70 modules and over 1,300 iris images and sclera images. You're supported with full color workbooks and all the tools you need. You'll earn 50 CPE points, and this is all self-paced and online. So that is for a very moderate price of just under $2,200 plus GST if you're in Australia. Now, I want to explain my logo. The central orb represents the globe, the world, and the iris. The starburst represents the iris itself, and the ribbons are in there's 3 ribbons. So we've got physical, emotional, and spiritual aspects from Australia, America, and Europe. And the shape is that of a mother holding her child. So I'd like to thank you very much.
Wow. Yeah, I'm almost speechless, Toni. Thank you so much for that presentation. You've just blown my mind. I've been writing down questions. I don't want to be a hog. I'm sure that everybody here is like, okay, now I've got to go get my iris checked. You know? I'm sure there's a lot of people that are now pretty curious about what their eye is going to reveal. So look, for those of you who are watching this live, stick around. We'll stop the recording in a moment, but we will still be here to answer questions and have a chat. If you are watching this recording, if you've got any questions or comments, we would love to hear from you. If you're watching this on YouTube, just put your comments down below in the chat box. We promise we will get back to you. Get in touch with Switch On Health directly, or of course, please do get in touch with Toni Miller at Integrated Iridology. Yeah, I'm sure that, well, it goes without saying, Toni is obviously as passionate about what she does as we are about what we do. And yeah, we'd love to hear from you. So Toni, thank you again. We'll keep going with the chat and questions and so on in a moment. And if you are watching this on a recording, we hope you enjoyed it and learn more with Switch On Health.